Hi, Kevin Wright here, back again with another weekly property finance tip. So, this week, we're talking about equity in property and how that can be used as a substitute for hard cash when you're looking for deposits to be put down. So, hang around, keep watching, and I'll explain more. So when you're going to buy a property, you need a cash deposit. Typically for a buy-to-let mortgage, you need 25% cash as a deposit. So because mortgage lenders are very picky, with very, very few exceptions, it needs to be your own cash and provable as your own cash. And don't be surprised if you're asked to provide bank statements going back several months to prove that it's your cash. Now, bridging lenders are different. They don't mind whether it's your cash or someone else's cash because you're going to be paying back in a few months by either refinancing or selling the property. But what if you haven't got some cash? Is that the end of the story? Well, not necessarily. Now, if you've watched my video, the 5 types of bridging, you'll know that one of the 5 types is called cross-collateral bridging. And if you haven't watched that, keep watching till the end of this video, but make a note to go and find the 5 types of bridging video on my YouTube channel. So, is a shortage of cash the end of the story? And does that rule you out of the game if you haven't got a pile of cash to put down as a deposit? Or even someone else's cash to put down as a deposit if you're using bridging? Not necessarily. So, cross-collateral bridging is about using the equity in a property you own as a substitute for what I call hard cash. So I'm going to drill down in a bit more detail on how cross-collateral bridging would work than I was able to in the 5 types of bridging video. So, what does cross-collateral bridging mean? So, let's look at that. We're going to look at it in 2 areas. One, the first area is a property that's got no mortgage on that you already own. And the second is a property that has got a mortgage on that you already own. So let's look at no mortgage first. So if you're one of those people that's lucky enough to own a property with no mortgage, whether you bought it cash or whether you've just paid the mortgage off at some point in the past, that puts you in a very powerful position. Let me explain why. So bridging lenders on residential properties would typically lend 75% of the value. Now, if you own it already, they will lend 75% of the value. So if it's worth, say, 200,000, then 75% of that is 150,000. So there's 150,000 pounds of equity there that you could use instead of cash to get into another property deal. Now, it could be that you can buy a property outright for less than 150 if you're investing in areas of the UK where that's possible. So in that case, you would get a loan on the property you own, let's say the 200,000 property you own, you would get a loan on that which would give you 150,000 cash to go and buy a property. Now you could buy a property for cash in the right areas of the UK, and maybe you could also cover the refurb cost as well for that money. So in that way you could use a property you already own without using any cash. Okay, you're going to have a valuation fee and maybe some legal fees, but you can buy a property without any liquid cash of your own. Now, that's a very empowering thing, and I've spoken to many people over the years that I've been involved in property and finance, which is well over 20 years. Now, I've spoken to many people that are in exactly that situation, but they think they can't buy property because they're locked in this I need cash as a deposit, and actually they never did. They could have always bought property for as long as they'd had an unencumbered property. So an unencumbered property with no borrowing on it, with no mortgage on it, gives you a huge advantage to go out and buy your next deal. But what if you want to buy, again, you keep using this example, you've got a 200,000 property that a bridging lender would lend you 150,000 on. But what if you want to buy a 300,000 property? Well, we can still do that because a bridging lender would lend you 75% of this 200,000 property that you already own, but they would also lend you 75% of the 300,000 property that you want to buy. That 150,000 usable equity in the property you own is enough to put down a 25% deposit on the 300,000 property and still have some cash left over to do the refurb if you so wish to do it. So without using any cash, again apart from legals and a valuation fee, you can buy a 300,000 property with no cash. Now again, this is all groundbreaking stuff for people that don't already know this. Now of course, when you're using bridging, this is not a long-term loan. So whether you're buying a property for less than 150 and doing it up, or you're buying the 300,000 property, it's because you're going to do something to add value in the short period of time, in a few weeks or months, and then you're going to sell it or refinance it to repay the bridging loan. And when you do that, your 200,000 property is now back that it has no mortgage on it. So you've bought another property, refinanced it, and now that's got a mortgage on it, or you've maybe sold it and banked the cash, and now you didn't have cash before, but now you've got a chunk of cash which is the profit from selling the deal. Either of those would work. So there we are. There's a great way to use equity that many people think is locked in a property when it actually isn't. It can be leveraged and used to buy property. And if you can work that so that you either buy or sell or refinance a property, and your unencumbered property goes back to being unencumbered, well, how many times can you do that? It's infinity, isn't it, really? Because if you can, each time you buy a property, using bridging finance to leverage the equity in that property, and you, at the end of that transaction, where you bought and sold or bought and refinanced, you end up with an unencumbered property. It's ad infinitum. But now let's look at the second area, because not everyone is lucky enough to have a property that they own with no mortgage. Now, if you're highly geared, so if your borrowing is really high, you know, certainly 70, 75% or even more than that, then you haven't actually got any usable equity. You've got equity, of course, but it's not usable from a bridging perspective. So in reality, for most people, you would need to have no more than a 50% loan to value mortgage. So your mortgage would ideally be 50% or even lower, and the equity in your property is 50% or even higher. Now, if that's you, then this could work for you. So how does this work? Well, some bridging lenders, not all, but some bridging lenders will do second charge lending. So here's what that means. You can leave your mortgage undisturbed, and you can take a bridging loan that sits in on top of that. They would take a second charge over your property. Now, typically they would lend to no more than 65%. So if you've got a property, let's say worth 200,000 and your mortgage is 100, well, 65% of 200 is 130. Now your mortgage is already 100. So your usable equity is the difference between not 200, but 65% of that, which is 130, and the 100 mortgage. So this bit here, £30,000. So that's the equivalent of cash that you can do, as I've said before. Now, you're not going to find many properties in the UK for £30,000. So you're going to use, it's going to be cross-collateral as well. So it's going to be used as for the deposit that you're buying. Let's say you're buying a property at 100,000 and a bridger lends you 75% of that, so that's 75,000. You need a 25,000 deposit. Well, you've got this £30,000 of usable equity in the property you own with a low mortgage on it, and that can be used as the deposit. So I'm not giving you just a simple numbered example there, but it can be in many different ways. And that's how you would use equity in a property that you own already. whether you own it with no mortgage or with a fairly low mortgage. So either of those ways gets you into deals that you maybe think, oh, I can't do a deal because I haven't got enough cash for a deposit. And hey, there's a lot of people that are thinking like that. Now maybe that's opened up a way for you to invest in property that you hadn't previously considered. And if so, fantastic. I've done my job of sharing some good knowledge and information with you. Now if you've enjoyed this video, hang around because I've got another couple to show you from my YouTube channel. And hey, click that subscribe and feel free to leave a comment and I'll be sure to pick it up. So that's all for now. So I'm going to say cheerio for now and I'll catch you next week with another property finance tip.